dentistry is not that big.
Okay, cool. So I first want to ask you about why you enrolled as a Marine.
Well, in 1953, the Korean War was on. And in order to keep from getting drafted, I joined the Marine Corps.
Oh, okay. And then why did you choose the Marine Corps?
Well, I thought it was a lot better than the Army, and I was right.
That's a good reason. Okay. So then, when were you drafted into? Drafted into the Vietnam War.
Well, I was on active duty. I was a Marine from 1953 to 1973.
Okay.
There was no drafting as far as my going to Vietnam.
Oh, okay. Well, then I don't know the exact terminology then. So then, when were you sent to Vietnam then?
In 1965, we loaded aboard the USS Princeton and sailed to Subic Bay, Philippines. From Subic Bay, Philippines, we sailed to Da Nang. And from Da Nang they offloaded the helicopters and took the rest of us down to a place called Keehaw, where we set up a helicopter base.
Okay. So we only briefly learned in history that the Marines were in the rough of a lot of the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
So what exactly did you do? So were you in the air? Were you in the air? Were you on the ground?
I was in the air. I was a crew chief and gunner on Hueys.
Can you explain what that means? Because I just don't know.
Well, a crew chief on a helicopter has to maintain the helicopter. He flies with the helicopter, he gasses it, he fuels it.
Okay.
A gunner on the Huey, on the gunships, you had 4 external machine guns
Okay.
and 2 sets of two rocket pods.
Okay.
Inside you had 2 machine guns, which the crew chief and the gunner would use to fire.
Okay. How long were you in Vietnam?
First time 13 months, the second time 13 months.
Oh, so you went twice.
Yes.
So the first time was 1963, but did you
1965 to 1966.
Okay. And then when was the second time that you went?
1968 and 1969.
Okay. 68. Just want to get the dates really right. Okay. So going into the war, because you were a career Marine, it was very different from someone who got drafted into the Vietnam War, right? So going into the Vietnam War, because I feel like going in versus coming out of it, there's a lot of difference. There's a very different opinions once you leave, right? That's like kind of what we got from a lot of the documentaries we watched on it.
Oh yeah.
Right. So what did you go in thinking that you were like? What would you feel that you were fighting for going in?
I was doing my job.
Okay. And you're fighting against communism, right? Too. Was that part of it too? Like fighting for?
That was my job. I went we trained to be Marines. We trained to fly with our helicopters. We trained to fire our weapons, and that's what we did.
Mm-hmm.
There was no, I don't want to be here stuff as far as I was concerned. A few were that way, but most of us weren't.
Okay. So, do you think the costs of the war are like not justified, but do you think they were worth it?
It would have been if they'd have kept the politicians out of it.
Okay. What do you mean by that?
Politicians lost the war. Politicians put in rules and regulations that were very hard to abide by.
Yeah.
They put in things like you can't shoot unless you were shot at. So if you were dead, you couldn't shoot back. So
Yeah.
But if somebody shot at you, you could shoot back, basically.
Okay.
And that's stuff like that. They had no fire zones. So the enemy could be over there in the no fire zone and do whatever they wanted to do, and then come out and try to kill you or whatever.
Were you ever on the ground?
Some, yeah.
Sometimes. Yeah, okay. I just know there's a lot of guerrilla warfare, which was kind of the big shell shock that happened when like people came back, was that a lot of people on the ground, they didn't. I think it was like the exact terms. The people during the day were like farmers, and at night
they were VC.
Yeah, VC. That was it. Okay. So
we had the VC come into the helicopter base outside of Da Nang, and they planted a bunch of satchel charges in helicopters and killed several people, and of course we killed several of them, and one of the people we killed was the base barber.
wow, so you really didn't know who your enemy was.
You didn't know who they all were.
Wow. Yeah, because because that was one thing too. You see, on the news articles, like, who's our enemy? Because you just didn't know.
Yeah.
Which is just even scarier. So you didn't even know. You couldn't even trust anyone.
No.
No. And they also were in like trenches and what I know about that. But you were above ground, so you were shooting from what you could see from above, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when they would shoot at us, we'd shoot back.
Yeah. Yeah, that would make the most sense. So when you came back, this was kind of one of the bigger epidemics, like, in U.S. history towards, like, anti-war happening. So when you came back both times, what were your feelings towards that? Because there was a lot of anti-war and
There wasn't too much in '66.
Okay. It only got until later, right?
But it came up later, and I was very frustrated with the people that did that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Well, they're not respecting your service.
Huh?
They're not respecting what you did for them.
No, the military had nothing to do with it. The politicians politicians start wars, and they quote unquote end wars sometimes very poorly. And Vietnam was a good example.
Yeah, definitely. It didn't end the way it should have. Oh yeah, because you started. Yeah, so then, because you were in the beginning, right, of the Vietnam War, and you weren't there, when it kind of all ended. Because were you at home or in the U.S. at that point? Yeah.
Well, the troops were basically pulled out in 1973.
Yeah.
70 to 73. Okay, I retired in 73.
Okay. So
And,
what were your feelings about, so when you were no longer involved in the Vietnam War, when you were home, right, watching the news or hearing about it indirectly, what were your emotions towards the war, like, from you being there to just watching it? Like, how did your feelings change about the war?
No.
No? Okay. Okay. I'm really interested about the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Yeah.
Sean told me a little bit of a story, but she only has this very small perspective. It was just one day he was like, "I gotta go," and you couldn't tell her why. So what exactly happened for you during the Cuban Missile Crisis?
Well, when the Cuban Missile Crisis started, I was up at Pickle Meadows in California,
Okay.
picking up an airplane that had gone down in the field. When I got up there was recon people all over the place. They were having maneuvers up there.
Okay.
That was on Friday. Saturday morning we got up and there were no recon people anywhere.
Okay.
So we broke down the aircraft and put it on the truck and brought it home.
Okay.
We got home and the OD said that the skipper wanted to see all the staff and officers the next morning.
Okay.
So we did. The skipper says, we may be going somewhere. Wednesday we board the Iwo Jima, heading out of San Diego.
Okay.
That's when I couldn't tell your mother or grandmother where I was going.
So you're going from where? From San Diego somewhere else?
Well, we went down and we went through the Panama Canal.
Okay.
And we went out and we sailed round and round Cuba.
Okay. And you were
Okay.
just monitoring the situation?
Oh yeah, well, there wasn't a whole lot to do aboard ship.
Okay.
You're sailing round and round Cuba.
Okay. And how much did you know? Like, 'cause I feel like we didn't really get to figure out like how much the public really knew, but you weren't even the public, you were in. How much did you know what was going on?
Not a whole lot, actually.
Okay.
We knew that we had to turn back any Russian ships that was carrying missiles. And of course we had helicopters, so there's not a whole lot a helicopter can do to a ship that's carrying missiles. But we were supporting, if we had to, we were going to go into Cuba. But when Khrushchev finally capitulated and turned his ships around, we came home. We came back through the Panama Canal and up the west coast and back to Pendleton, or San Diego, actually.
But did you know that did you know that there was like a threat, the nuclear threat? Is that, you knew that's the reason?
Why we were there.
You knew why you were there.
Oh, yeah, very definitely.
Okay, because I feel like the general public there was some type of warnings happening, but they didn't really know what was going on. So I assumed you would know more, but probably not all of what was happening, right?
Well, we thought maybe we were going to invade Cuba, but we never did. So.
Okay. So you were just waiting, right? So you're just waiting and waiting an order saying either you're gonna go in or you're not, and you only turn around when Khrushchev said we'll take our missiles out.
Yeah.
Okay. So how long was that? How long were you on
About
the
3
ship?
months, 90 days or so.
90 days. Oh, so that was way longer than the week span of like when we learn in history, it's like the Cuban Missile Crisis, we learned it in like, I think it's like 9 days or something, which is like when the tensions got really, really high. So you were there before that. So there was already a threat. Wait. Okay, I didn't know that. So there was a threat for much longer than what at least I learned about.
When they flew the aircraft over Cuba and saw the missile sites, that's when the missile crisis started. And then Russia wanted to resupply and build more missile sites, and Kennedy said, no, you can't do that. So we put a blockade, that's what I was a part of, the blockade around Cuba.
Oh, okay.
And Russia tried to send ships in, and we turned them around, and Khrushchev capitulated to John F. Kennedy.
Okay. And then we also learned that a blockade's an act of war. So did you think that when you're in it that this was like the beginning of a war? Because blockades are usually like establishes an act of war, but we made it,
Blockades are not necessarily an act of war.
and then there's something else. It's if you're blocking supplies to a country, isn't that an act of war?
No.
Is it not?
No.
No, okay. But did you think that this was the beginning of war going into it? A possible war?
We thought maybe we would have to go into Cuba, yes.
Okay. Interesting. We really did learn about it, how it's like it was a very short span of time and not 90 days that this like was a big threat. So maybe it was just only publicized, like maybe made public for a short period of time to lower the chaos a little bit. Okay, that's interesting. So what were your feeling? What would you describe like the country's feeling, or even like on the basis feelings during the Cold War?
Which war?
The Cold War.
Cold War?
Yeah.
That's hard to say. The Cold War was more of a political war than anything else.
Yeah, so it wasn't as there wasn't a lot of tension.
There was nothing to do with mainly the military.
Okay.
Cold War was you build up your missile, we'll build up our missile. You get rid of your missile, we'll get our missile. It was all political, back and forth, and
Okay.
we didn't get involved.
Okay, interesting. And then going back to the Vietnam War, it was a large-scale proxy war, right? In a sense. When you went into the war, I just want to go back. I'm going backwards. I just thought of a question. What did you think if we were successful, what we're gonna come out with? What did you think was the end goal? And what do you think the U.S. and yourself, or the Army or the Marines and everyone in general, the military in general, was trying to achieve?
Well, the North invaded the South.
Yes.
And our objective was to drive the North back to the North and let the South be independent.
Okay. And that was to maintain
That was part of the treaties at the end of the Second World War.
Okay, got it. And also to keep communism isolated, right?
Well, we wanted to, yes,
as well. 'Cause there's
communism was a
a Red Scare was a big.
very big scare as far as everybody was concerned.
Okay. Then I have a question with the Red Scare then. So back into the U.S., how were you affected by the Red Scare? How was people around you affected by the Red Scare?
No,
Just more?
not really. As long as it's contained overseas, people don't care a whole lot.
Okay, because there was the whole entire, the Hollywood 10 and that type of stuff where we had a lot of the, you get convicted of being a communist, you go to the court and they'd ask you
That again was political.
so that didn't affect you at all. That didn't.
Not really, no.
Okay, so that didn't impact you at all.
In most cases, we thought it was stupid, but then we were not allowed to judge.
Judge, got it. Okay, so I'm just so in the base in general, because those were more political versus more political and less to do with you on the base. The things like the Red Scare and like the Cold War were less of. It wasn't a big thing that held tension there.
The people with the Red quote-unquote scare were the people that manned the missiles, the Air Force people that had the silos and that sort of stuff,
Okay.
and the high-flying spy aircraft. But as far as ground troops, which we basically are, or were, there was nothing to do with us, basically, except to be ready. During that period, Congress decided to cut us back pretty much. And, they cut us back when the Vietnam War started, well, in '65. The Vietnam War started actually 10 or 12 years before that. But when we left out of Pendleton in '65, the Marine Corps Standing Army was 186,000. By the middle of 1966, it was almost 450,000.
And that was because of cutbacks, or is it because of losses?
Well, no, they cut us back to 186,000. So our saying was, we can do anything with nothing. And basically we had to do scrounge whatever we could and do whatever we could. But then the war started and it became popular to provide for the military, so
Okay.
things expanded rather rapidly.
Okay. Got it. I'm gonna ask you an in-depth question about Vietnam. I just have to think a minute. I'm sure I want to ask the right question. Because you're in because you're in the sky most of the time, so you had a different perspective from people who were.
Our perspective was sometimes different, yes.
Yes. So the losses were very great in this war.
Sometimes they were, yes.
Yes. And
the fact that the press wanted to publicize them all the time didn't help at all.
Yeah, it didn't either. I think I asked you the losses outweigh the outcome.
That's hard to say.
But it is hard to say, right? Because you don't know. There was there's just a lot of loss, and it was a very, we just watched a lot, and it's hard to watch when you see some people talk about, they lose their comrades and that type of stuff. In the moment when you were there, you were in other wars before this, right?
No.
You were not?
The Korean War ended when I was at Camp Pendleton in July of '53, and I was at Camp Pendleton going through combat.
So this was your first war?
That was my first actual combat, yes.
Okay, this is my question. I finally got it. So, even now, right, when people came back from Afghanistan, they have a really hard time coming back to civilian life. So
They seem to have a harder time than we did, yes.
I think they see a lot of children die. which would make sense. But what was your experience coming back?
I just did my job.
Did your job? Did you have any friends around you that really struggled when they came back home?
Not really.
Not really. Okay. Well, that's good to hear. You know, that was the big thing too. Is that a lot of people, you know, their families broke apart because they just didn't know.
A couple of people I knew in a little dinghy, but other than that.
That's a positive. That's a positive. You know, you don't hear it on all these documentaries. You also hear kind of the worst of it, the worst that happens usually when they interview
Well,
people.
if you're going to look for the worst and publicize the worst, you get the worst.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And because you got one or two that are worse, that doesn't cover the other 1.5 million that weren't.
Yeah. And I have one last question that was on our list of questions that asked, because this was a foreign war. How do you feel about America's involvement now when we went into Afghanistan, and now we're still in the Middle East a little bit. So how do you feel about how did you feel about Afghanistan? How do you feel about Americans for America's foreign policy?
They have to complete what they started. That's the same way with any war. That's the reason the North took over the South, because we didn't complete what we started.
Yeah.
When we left South Vietnam, the Congress of the United States promised the South that they would provide them with all of the stuff they needed to protect their borders and to be safe. Then Congress withdrew it all. And the North came in and took over.
And to this day, Vietnam is still communist.
Yes.
So then how do you feel about, we left Afghanistan, right?
I think we ought to finish what we started.
And this is our, Afghanistan is very different from Vietnam, and Vietnam was fighting communism, and, you know, after World War II we had all these treaties that we needed to defend and respect. While as Afghanistan was on the war on terror, right? We were trying to fight terrorists. So how do you feel about that? About we're fighting versus fighting kind of something that, fighting in a sense we're fighting for like democracy and something, an idea of government that we do not believe is right, versus this one's more about terrorism. How do you feel about that?
Well, George Bush had pretty much the right idea. And then Barack Obama came in there and he ruined everything that George Bush did.
Because?
Because he told the enemy what we were going to do, when we're going to do it, how we're going to do it, and he brought the troop levels down to where they couldn't sustain themselves. You notice you don't hear a whole lot about the war in Afghanistan and so forth right now, right? You know why?
No.
Because the president is backing them up. The president isn't capitulating. He supports the troops. He supports what they do. And that's the difference. We would have been out of there 8 or 9 years ago if Barack Obama had any guts at all.
Okay.
He did more harm to the military and our foreign policy than any president we ever had. And I think the man is absolutely useless. My political commentary.
So therefore, you support in the war effort for Afghanistan because it's a war on terror, it's justified, right? Okay. But we need to finish our jobs. We need to finish what we went there for.
Yep.
We can't just leave.
You can't just leave.
We can't leave like what we did in Vietnam, right? Okay. That is all I think I have. Because that's also, I want to tie it back to something more, something that I lived. I wasn't alive that I'm here now, right? Because since I was little, Afghanistan was starting, right? Because I was probably 7 or something, right?
Yeah.
That I remember I saw it on the news a lot, and then now you don't anymore.
Yeah.
So I have no idea, and so I didn't even think about the idea of why we were there for so long. Because, right, we were in Vietnam for a very long time, and we have no idea how long we're going to be in Afghanistan for.
If you don't support the troops,
You're gonna be there for much longer.
Things are gonna go down.
Yeah.
And if you got to get rid of the bad guys in the country, and not all the bad guys are on the other side of the rifle.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of them are politicians and other stuff.
That's true. And I think
in the Far East, there's probably more corruption than you can go anywhere else and find.
there's lots of problems there. Yeah. And yeah, terrorism has been a national threat to us. So I think, yeah, to me, Afghanistan's very justified. People debate about Vietnam, right, all the time. It's more about the loss, right, and then we never really won. And I think that's where people don't know. They can't say if it was a justified war or not.
Actually, we won the war in Vietnam. The politicians gave it away. We actually did. We won the war during the Tet Offensive, but the press wouldn't let us win the war. And the politicians wouldn't let us win the war.
When was the Tet Offensive?
1968. The spring of 68.
Okay, and then why were troops still there then?
Huh?
Why were troops still in Vietnam then, till 73?
Well, the war was going on. Okay. We had basically defeated the North.
Okay.
And all they had to do was finish the job. Like a few bombings and bombing Haiphong Harbor and so forth. And they would have capitulated. But the politicians didn't do that. They didn't allow it to happen.
They
let the North rebuild again and come right back in.
That's when you were talking about all the regulations were set, right?
Oh, yes.
And then they weren't even allowed to do some of the stuff that would allow them to win the war.
Yeah.
So we got close and then we couldn't.
Yeah.
And I think it was because, if I'm right, it was never declared like not a real war, but there's under some type of category that I think that when they started putting regulations in, it was because they didn't want it to become something else, right? It was something
Yeah.
I can't remember exactly what it's called.
I can't think of what you're thinking of either, but
you know what I'm talking about, and
yeah.
that's why they started putting regulations in. So would it be declared as whatever?
No, it was not a declared war.
War. Yes, exactly. And so I think that's what. But then they started putting those regulations, and then you couldn't win. But it was because they don't want to actually declare war.
Actually, the Vietnam War started under Eisenhower.
Really? Yeah, it was.
That's when we put the first advisors in.
Wow.
It's fine, Mom. It's fine.
So there it is. Okay. No, because that's interesting. Because we learned the Vietnam War was never a declared war,
No.
and so that would make sense that we got close, but then the regulations were put in. And the regulations were put in because we didn't want it to become war.
I don't know why the politicians were that way.
We don't know either. we go because I'm in an AP history course, like a really intensive and very you go into it fully. You're just we were all like this, because you go through every president, right, that who ran the house during the Vietnam War, and you're just like, what were they doing? It was just you question it because they just kept on.
Well, Eisenhower sent the first advisors into Vietnam.
Okay.
To ward off the VC.
Okay.
And to stabilize the Saigon government.
Okay.
And that was followed up by Kennedy, who increased them somewhat.
Okay.
And then when Kennedy was killed and Johnson took over, Johnson expanded it exponentially.
Yes. Yes. We learned more about Kennedy and Johnson's kind of fueling the start of the Vietnam War. More than Eisenhower. I think he probably briefed over it, but I didn't really remember that we probably didn't go over it. Okay, thank you. That was very interesting. I just didn't. You have a very different perspective if I asked some person, another 80-year-old in my neighborhood, and asked them about it who was at home, right? They probably have a different perspective or a different idea of what the war was because they weren't there.
Yeah.
They were watching the news, which they were focusing on, and we talked about how each night they put the death
number
counts.
of troops lost.
Yeah. And so it was a very different story to people who were at home because it just felt like this unwinnable war, and it felt like this it was just like this kind of like dark cloud. So I'm glad I interviewed you because my teacher was very excited too, because she has I think he was Army though. I don't think he was Marine. But he was drafted into the war. And he was on the ground. But she said it's really interesting to get the perspective versus someone who just was at the home front, because you get to know a little bit more about it than just kind of what they saw on the news.
Well, we used to go in and pick up the wounded and the dead and all that sort of stuff too. So.
And that's hard. You got to see it firsthand, which isn't not, and I just think it's also because I respect your service for our country. When we talked about it, and there's a lot of people in my class, and I think the Vietnam War was frustrating, for someone who's learning about it. But a lot of people in my class are just kind of ripping on the military service, and I'm like, you don't understand what they did, and they were fighting for us. Like, they were fighting for us, everyone. And you can't disrespect that, Some people got drafted and were forced to be there, but a lot of people volunteered because they thought they were doing the right thing.
Yeah.
They thought they were protecting their families and all that. And
in 1953, everybody 18 and over got drafted, so
yeah, and so
that's why I joined the Marine Corps, because I didn't want to be in the Army.
That's what we learned about too, is that people would voluntarily go into a department versus getting drafted, so they get to choose where they ended up.
Yeah.
Which was kind of the smart decision.
Well, a lot of people joined the Air Force so they wouldn't have to do that. So.
Yeah.
And the Air Force, well, there's a few Air Force people that saw combat. In fact, a very good friend of mine who died about a year and a half ago, he was a combat medic.
Oh my gosh.
He's the only guy I know that had 5 silver stars.
Wow. But that would be a hard job. You couldn't imagine. You just see a bunch of young men not in the...
But they used to call him Combat John. So.
Yeah. So you weren't on the ground that often, right?
No, well, my second tour I was a supply officer.
Okay.
At Quang Tri. So I stood the perimeter guard every third night.
Okay.
So if we had, a little attack or whatever, or rockets or whatever, I was there for that.
Okay.
And one of them blew me up in about 30 feet. So, but like I said, I've been shot down, and blown up. So there's nothing left to do. So.
Did it go through you?
No.
It was just
it was at night. I got up off my bunk and I picked up my flak jacket, and the rocket hit about from here to the couch. And
also you got thrown from it.
I got thrown about 20 feet and knocked me out. And I listened to my demise by my buddies in the bunker. So the rumors of my demise are greatly exaggerated.
Yeah. Well, that's oh my god. I thought you meant it came. I'm like, you can't be alive if you were it went straight at you. I didn't understand. Okay, that's still terrifying. Okay, so you were so the first time you were in the helicopter, the second time you were on the ground. And then the Army was the one that went out, right? That the Army was the one who kind of was involved in the guerrilla warfare, right? More or less.
In the South, yeah. The Marines were in the North.
Yes.
We had the I Corps.
Oh.
The Army pretty much had the South.
Oh,
the Army
so you were in the North.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, that makes more sense.
So from I don't know what the dividing line, but we were called I Corps, which was the furthest section of the war north.
Okay.
First section of Vietnam north.
Okay.
So we had Da Nang and all of those places, and Chu Lai and Hee Haw and Quang Tri, and.
Okay.
But the Army had the South. The Army had Saigon and all of those places down there.
And that's where
all
the invasions happened. Okay, so you were in. Oh, I didn't know you were in the North. That's interesting. Okay, and so you were. How did that work if you were in the North?
Well, not North Vietnam, just northern section of South Vietnam.
Oh, okay, got it, okay.
South Vietnam was divided into sections.
Okay.
And we were in I Corps, and that was the section we were in. We went
Okay.
into the jungle. We did the whole smear.
Okay, got it. Got it. That makes more sense. Okay, guys. I was like, how are you? I didn't understand how you were in the north.
No,
That'd be
We were in the northern part of South Vietnam.
Okay, makes more sense. Like, I don't-
Saigon is down here, and Da Nang is up here.
Okay.
So this is the Army-controlled area, basically,
Uh-huh.
in here. And this is up here around Da Nang. We covered this area here.
Okay.
Over to the Cambodian border.
Okay.
And sometimes we crossed back and forth between stuff.
Okay.
The Army'd come up and run special operations
Yeah.
out of our area, and
Vice versa.
We would-
And Saigon was kind of like if Saigon falls.
Saigon was the headquarters.
Okay.
That was the seat of the government of the South.
Okay, and so if Saigon fell, that was why that was like a big deal when it became a threat. Got it. Makes more sense. I was very confused for a minute when you said you're in the north. I'm like, how are you in the north? Like,
No, the northern part of South Vietnam.
Okay, got it. Okay. If I have more questions, I'll ask you before I leave. I think we covered everything because you gave me I just wanted kind of a general thing so I could kind of put it into words because this is an interesting project. Because I think the other one that was like World War II, and I was like, he didn't fight in that, so that doesn't sound. He's done 100 something. He's 80.
Yeah.
Yeah. When I went to Ireland, when we went